The avoidant is sitting in their defended independence, realizing it feels nothing like freedom and everything like isolation, now that you're gone. They wanted space, they got infinite space, they wanted distance, they wanted to not feel pressured by your needs. Now they feel nothing from you at all. No needs, no pressure, no presence, no access. And the absence of access to you is creating a specific kind of pain they've never experienced before, because they've never been the one who was cut off. They've always been the one doing the cutting off, the one who controlled the distance, the one who decided when to be close and when to withdraw. But you took that control completely. You didn't just stop pursuing them. You eliminated their ability to access you entirely. Blocked everywhere, unavailable through mutual friends. Physically absent from any space where they might see you. The totality of being cut off is devastating them in ways their psychology isn't equipped to handle, because their entire defensive structure was built on the assumption that they could withdraw without losing access, that they could create distance without being distanced from, that they could push people away while maintaining the option to pull them back if they wanted. You destroyed that assumption. You're not an option they can exercise when they're ready. You're just gone. What hurts most is their discovering that access to you was something they valued immensely, but never appreciated while they had it. They took for granted that you'd always be available to talk to when they felt like talking, available to lean on when they needed support, available to validate them when they needed ego stroking, available to be the stable presence in their life even while they were unstable presence in yours. The access was so consistent that they stopped noticing it was gift rather than right. They assumed your availability was a permanent feature of their landscape, something they could count on regardless of how they treated you. But now the access is gone, and they're experiencing the gaping hole where you used to be. They can't text you about their day. They can't call you when they're stressed. They can't see what you're doing or how you're feeling. They can't reach out when they're lonely, or when they want attention, or when they miss you. Every impulse to connect with you meets wall of your absence. And meeting that wall repeatedly throughout each day is teaching them exactly how much they depended on having access to you. Access they never acknowledged depending on, because acknowledging dependency would contradict their identity as independent person who doesn't need anyone. The sadness they're experiencing isn't the sadness of losing a relationship. They convinced themselves the relationship wasn't that important, that you weren't that special, that they could easily find someone else. The sadness is about losing access to a specific person who understood them in ways most people don't, who accepted them despite their limitations, who was consistent presence they could count on even while they were being inconsistent. You were a resource they used without recognizing they were using it, support system they leaned on without admitting they needed support, safety net they took for granted while they walked their emotional tightrope of avoiding intimacy while still having someone care about them. And now the resource is gone, the support system has collapsed, the safety net has been removed. They're experiencing what it actually means to be alone in ways their performance of independence never included. They're alone without the option of not being alone if it gets too hard. Alone without someone who knows them checking in. Alone without the particular comfort you provided that they're discovering can't be easily replaced or recreated with someone else. The specific dimensions of access they lost and how each one hurts. They lost access to your understanding, and that loss is hitting them every time they do something difficult or face something challenging and wish they could talk to you about it. You understood them in ways that are rare. You saw through their defenses to the person underneath. You recognized their patterns as fear rather than as character flaws. You got them in ways most people don't get them, because you'd taken time to learn them, to understand their history, to recognize what drove their behavior, and they took that understanding completely for granted. Dismissed it as you being too understanding, as if understanding was weakness rather than gift. Now they're encountering people who don't understand them, who take their behavior at face value, who don't see past the defenses to the wounds. And the contrast is making them realize how valuable your understanding was, how rare it is to be truly seen and accepted, how much easier life was when they had someone who understood them even when they were being difficult. The loss of your understanding means they're back to being misunderstood, back to people judging them rather than seeing them, back to feeling isolated in ways that your understanding had been preventing even while they were creating distance. They lost access to your patience, and every new person who won't tolerate what you tolerated is teaching them how much patience you had and how little they appreciated it. You were patient with their need for space. You waited when they withdrew. You gave them time to process before expecting them to communicate. You accepted their limitations while believing they'd eventually grow past them. The patience was extraordinary, and they treated it as ordinary, as something everyone would give them, as basic requirement rather than exceptional grace. Now they're dating or connecting with people who have normal levels of patience, people who expect reciprocity, who won't wait indefinitely, who lose interest when the avoidant does their typical withdrawal routine. And losing these new people quickly, losing them in ways they never lost you because you stayed so much longer, is teaching them that your patience was special, that most people won't give endless chances, that what you offered was rare and they treated it as disposable. They lost access to your emotional labor, and they're discovering how much work you were doing that they weren't even aware you were doing. You were managing the relationship, initiating conversations, making plans, checking in, maintaining connection that they weren't maintaining. You were doing the emotional work of understanding their moods, anticipating their needs, regulating your behavior to avoid triggering their withdrawal. You were carrying the relationship while they were just existing in it. And now that you're gone, now that no one is doing that labor, they're experiencing what relationship feels like when both people are as passive as they were. Nothing happens. No one reaches out. Plans don't materialize. Connection doesn't maintain itself. They're learning, through absence of your labor, how much you were doing, how much the relationship was functioning because of your effort, rather than because of mutual effort. And the learning is painful because it's revealing how little they contributed while judging your contributions as neediness or excessive effort, rather than recognizing you were doing work that partnership requires. They lost access to your validation and ego stroking, and their ego is suffering without the regular reinforcement you provided. You made them feel attractive, desirable, interesting, important. You were impressed by their achievements. You laughed at their jokes. You made them feel like they mattered, like they were special, like they were enough. All of this was feeding their ego constantly, providing steady stream of validation that they internalized as being about their inherent qualities, rather than recognizing it as something you were actively giving them through your attention and admiration. Now the validation stream is gone and their ego is depleting. New people aren't as impressed. New people don't give the same quality of attention. New people see through their performance in ways you didn't see through it. Or they see through it the same way you did, but unlike you, they're not charmed by the person underneath. The ego depletion is creating insecurity the avoidant hasn't felt in years, because your validation was protecting them from that insecurity. And without your validation, they're confronting core beliefs about their inadequacy that your consistent admiration was covering. They lost access to your body, your physical presence, your specific way of being in space with them. This dimension is hitting them in unexpected moments, when they reach for you in bed and you're not there, when they want physical comfort, and there's no one who touches them the way you touched them. When they see something beautiful and turn to share it with you, but you're not beside them anymore. The physical absence is its own form of grief that the avoidant didn't anticipate because they told themselves the relationship wasn't that physical, wasn't about the body, was primarily intellectual or convenient. But bodies remember, and their body remembers yours and wants yours in ways their mind is trying to deny. The physical loss is teaching them that intimacy was more embodied than they acknowledged, that your physical presence was comfort they depended on even while maintaining emotional distance, that you can't separate physical from emotional when someone's been integrated into your life as thoroughly as you were integrated into theirs. How being cut off is destroying their defensive identity. The avoidant's entire identity is built on being the person who doesn't need anyone, who's fine alone, who can walk away from relationships without being affected. But being cut off by you is destroying that identity, because the identity only worked when they were the one controlling the distance. Being independent by choice feels powerful. Being alone because someone else chose to cut you off feels like rejection, like abandonment, like being deemed not worth keeping. The avoidant can't maintain the story that they're choosing independence when you're the one who chose to make them independent by removing yourself from their life. The narrative breaks down completely. If they truly didn't need anyone, your cutting them off shouldn't matter. But it matters enormously. They're sad, they're hurting, they're trying desperately to regain access to you. All of this behavior contradicts the independent identity, and the contradiction is creating crisis where they have to either admit the identity is false or double down on the defensive narrative in ways that require ignoring their obvious pain about losing you. The identity destruction is also happening through the avoidant, recognizing they were dependent on you in ways they never admitted. They told themselves they didn't need you, but their behavior since you cut them off proves otherwise. They need your understanding because other people don't understand them. They need your patience because other people won't wait for them. They need your validation because other people aren't giving it. They need access to you specifically because you're not interchangeable with just anyone. You are doing things for them emotionally and psychologically that they can't get elsewhere, that they're suffering without. The realization that they're dependent on someone they claimed not to need is shattering their self-concept. They built everything on not needing and discovering they do need. Specifically need you is forcing them to face that they're not who they believe themselves to be. They're not the invulnerable, independent person. They're someone who attaches and needs and depends. They just do all of it while defended and denying. Being cut off is also destroying their identity by revealing they're not as in control as they believed. The avoidance identity includes believing they control their emotional state, that they're not at mercy of their feelings, that they can regulate themselves without needing others. But being cut off by you is proving they can't control how much they're affected by your absence. They're sad and they can't just decide not to be sad. They miss you and they can't just decide not to miss you. They want access to you and they can't just decide they don't want it. The feelings are happening to them rather than being managed by them. And feelings happening to them directly contradicts identity built on feelings being under control. The loss of control over their emotional response to losing you is teaching them that their control was always illusion, was always dependent on external circumstances being manageable, was always going to fail the moment they encountered a person whose absence affected them more than their defenses could manage. The sadness about being cut off is also destroying their identity by forcing them to admit they care about someone deeply enough that losing them hurts. The avoidant has other exes, other relationships that ended, but they weren't sad about those endings. They were relieved or indifferent, or mildly nostalgic at most. The intensity of their sadness about losing you is revealing that you weren't just another person they dated, weren't just convenient presence they enjoyed, weren't just someone they had mild attachment to. You were someone they loved even if they never said it, someone they were deeply attached to even if they never showed it, someone who mattered profoundly even if they treated you as if you were optional. And admitting that someone matters this much, that losing someone hurts this much, that they're this attached to anyone, all of this demolishes the identity of being a person who doesn't attach deeply, who doesn't need people, who's unaffected by relationship losses. Their sadness about being cut off is evidence that contradicts everything they've told themselves about who they are, the ways they're trying to get access back and why all of it is failing. The avoidant is experiencing strong impulse to restore access to you, and the impulse is generating various attempts that are all failing because you've made yourself genuinely unavailable. They're trying to reach out through the few channels they still have. Maybe email that's not blocked, maybe messages through mutual friends, maybe showing up at places they know you frequent. Each attempt is driven by belief that if they could just talk to you, if they could just explain, if they could just apologize or demonstrate they've changed, you'd give them access again. But the attempts are failing because you're not responding. The emails go unanswered. The messages through friends are met with friends saying you're not available for contact. The showing up is met with you leaving or not showing up at all because you've changed your patterns. Each failed attempt is teaching them that your cutting them off is serious, is permanent, is not negotiable through their usual tactics of minimal effort and maximum expectation that minimal effort should be sufficient. They're also trying to restore access by attempting to make you jealous or to show you what you're missing. They're posting on social media about how great their life is, about other people they're seeing, about activities that look fun and fulfilling. The posting is strategic. They want you to see it and feel regret about leaving them, want you to worry they're moving on, want you to break your silence to reach out and check on them, or to reclaim them from whoever else they're seeing. But this is failing because either you're not seeing the posts because you blocked them completely, or you're seeing them through mutual friends, and you're unbothered by them because you're genuinely moved on. The jealousy tactic only works if the target is still emotionally invested enough to be made jealous. But you're not invested anymore. You cut them off and moved forward, and their attempts to make you jealous are just confirming to you that you made the right decision because someone who's healthy and transformed wouldn't be playing these games. Some avoidants try the complete transformation approach. They start therapy, they post about their insights, they make public declarations about how much they're growing and changing. The strategy is to show you they're doing the work, to demonstrate they're becoming capable of what you needed from them, to create enough evidence of change that you'll give them access again to see if the change is real. But this is failing, because your boundaries aren't about waiting to see if they change. Your boundaries are about protecting yourself from someone who already proved they can't meet you, regardless of what they might become in the future. Even if their transformation is genuine, which is rare, Most avoidants don't sustain therapeutic work past the initial crisis of losing someone. The transformation benefits their future relationships, not your past relationship. You've moved on. You're not monitoring their growth. You're not waiting to see if they become someone different. You cut them off and built life without them, and that life is working better than life with them was working. They're learning that some losses are permanent regardless of subsequent growth. They're trying to get access by making you responsible for their well-being. Subtle or overt suggestions that they're not doing well, that they need you, that you're cutting them off is hurting them in ways that should concern you enough to respond. The tactic is manipulation through guilt. If they can make you feel responsible for their pain, maybe you'll feel obligated to respond, to check on them, to offer some support that would restore minimal access. But this is failing because you've learned that you're not responsible for managing their emotional state, that their pain about losing you is a natural consequence of how they treated you. That responding to their pain would be falling back into dynamic, where you sacrifice your well-being to manage theirs. You've developed immunity to guilt manipulation. Their pain is real, but it's not your responsibility. And your refusal to be moved by their pain is boundary that protects you from being pulled back into caretaking role that wasn't healthy for you. What the sadness is teaching them that nothing else could teach. The sadness about losing access to you is teaching the avoidant that their patterns have real costs, not theoretical costs they can intellectually understand and ignore, but felt costs that they have to sit with daily. Every previous relationship that failed, they could tell themselves it was incompatibility or bad timing or the other person's fault. But losing you specifically, losing someone who understood them, who was patient with them, who worked with their limitations, is teaching them that the problem is their patterns, not circumstances or partner selection. The sadness is forcing confrontation with the fact that they destroyed something good through their inability to be present, their refusal to be vulnerable, their consistent choosing of defended state over partnership. And the confrontation is painful enough that it might, possibly, motivate them to actually pursue the therapeutic work they've been avoiding. Or it might just make them more defended. But either way, the teaching is happening. Their patterns destroy relationships they actually value. And sadness about destruction they caused is only teacher that penetrates avoidant psychology enough to create possibility of change. The sadness is also teaching them about the difference between being alone by choice and being alone because someone chose not to be with you. The avoidant thought these were the same, thought being alone was being alone regardless of how it came about. But they're learning viscerally that there's massive difference. Being alone by choice feels like power, like freedom, like self-determination. Being alone because you cut them off feels like rejection, like inadequacy, like being judged and found wanting. The quality of aloneness is completely different, and the difference is teaching them that their identity as independent person who's fine alone was built on maintaining control over the aloneness. But they don't have control anymore. You took it when you cut them off. And aloneness without control over it is teaching them they were never as comfortable with aloneness as they performed being. They were comfortable with chosen distance while maintaining access. They're not comfortable with imposed distance where access is eliminated entirely. The sadness is teaching them what you actually meant to them in ways they couldn't see while they had access to you. When you were available, they could minimize your importance, tell themselves you were just another relationship, just convenient presence, just someone they were casually involved with. But your absence is revealing how integrated you were into their life, how much they depended on you being there, how significant you were to their daily experience, even while they were treating you as insignificant. The sadness is proportional to the importance, and the intensity of their sadness is teaching them that you weren't casual or unimportant. You were deeply important, deeply valued, deeply integrated into their life in ways they denied while taking your presence for granted. The teaching through loss is teaching through pain, and pain is better teacher than any words you could have said about how important you were to them. The sadness is also teaching them about the permanence of consequences. They've gotten away with their patterns before. People gave them multiple chances, people took them back, people allowed them to repeat the same behaviors multiple times without permanent consequence. But your cutting them off is permanent consequence they can't escape. They can't charm their way out of it, they can't promise to change. And be believed they can't wait it out, because you're not waiting. The permanence is teaching them that eventually patterns cost you things you can't get back, that eventually someone leaves and doesn't return, that eventually the consequences catch up with you in ways that can't be managed or minimized. The teaching is painful but necessary. They needed to learn that behavior has lasting consequences, that some damage is irreparable, that some people leave permanently when they're treated poorly enough for long enough. Your permanent absence is the classroom where they're learning lessons they've avoided learning their entire life. How their sadness is different from normal grief, and why that matters. The sadness the avoidant is experiencing about losing access to you is different from how normal grief progresses because it's not fading with time the way grief usually does. Normal grief is intense initially and gradually diminishes as the person adjusts to the loss, integrates it, moves forward. But avoidant grief about losing you is intensifying over time because the full impact of the loss is dawning on them gradually. Initially, they might have felt relief or indifference or mild sadness, but as time passes, as they try to move forward and discover they can't find what they had with you anywhere else, as they recognize how much they depended on access to you, as they understand what they actually lost, the sadness is growing rather than shrinking. The intensification over time is evidence that they're finally feeling the attachment they were defending against while they had you. The full weight of their feelings is hitting them now, that it's safe to feel it because you're gone, so the feelings can't make them vulnerable to you anymore. The delayed grief is evidence of how defended they were while you were present, and the intensity of the delayed grief is evidence of how much they actually cared beneath the defenses. The sadness is also different because it's compounded by regret in ways normal grief usually isn't. Normal grief is about losing someone to circumstances outside your control: death, distance, incompatibility, mutual ending. But the avoidance grief about losing you is grief they caused. They know their patterns destroyed the relationship. They know their refusal to do their work led to you cutting them off. They know they had opportunities to be different, and they chose not to take those opportunities. The grief is laced with self-blame and recognition that they destroyed something valuable through their own choices. And grief plus responsibility is heavier than grief alone. They're mourning you, and they're also mourning their own role in losing you. And the combination is creating sadness that has additional weight, because it includes shame about who they were, regret about what they didn't do, and recognition that they can't blame circumstances or you, they can only blame themselves. The avoidant sadness is different, because it includes the meta-sadness of recognizing they're sad, which contradicts their entire identity. Normal people who are sad can be sad without the sadness itself being an identity crisis. But for the avoidant, being sad about losing someone is evidence that they're not who they thought they were. They're supposed to be unbothered, unaffected, fine with relationships ending. But they're not fine. They're sad. They miss you. They wish they could undo what happened. All of this internal experience contradicts the defended identity, and experiencing feelings that contradict your identity creates additional layer of distress beyond the feelings themselves. The avoidant isn't just sad about losing you. They're distressed about being sad, confused about being sad, having identity crisis because being sad means admitting they're not the independent, unbothered person they've been performing being. The meta layer of distress about having feelings is making the sadness more complicated and harder to process than normal grief would be. The sadness is also different because the avoidant has no support system to process it with. Normal grief is shared. You talk to friends, you get support, you process the loss with people who care about you. But the avoidant can't easily do this because admitting they're sad about losing you would require admitting they were more attached than they showed, would require contradicting every story they told their friends about the relationship, being casual, or about you being too needy. Their friends don't know how much you meant to them because the avoidant never showed it or said it. So the avoidant is processing this grief alone, without support, unable to reach out for help without revealing that their entire presentation of the relationship was performance. The isolation in grief is making the sadness heavier, more difficult to move through, more likely to turn into depression rather than progressing through normal grief stages toward acceptance. The final truth about their sadness and what it means for both of you. The final truth is that the avoidant's sadness about losing access to you is genuine, is deep, is evidence that you mattered to them profoundly, even though they never showed it adequately while they had you. Their sadness is validation of your experience. You weren't imagining the connection, weren't wrong about the relationship mattering, weren't confused about there being real feelings underneath their defended behavior. They did care. They were attached. You were important. The sadness is proving all of this. But the sadness existing doesn't change anything about the rightness of your decision to cut them off. They can be sad, and you can still be right to have left. Both things are true simultaneously. Their sadness is their experience to have and to learn from. Your boundaries are your protection to maintain regardless of their sadness. The sadness doesn't create obligation for you to respond, to give them access to make them feel better about losing you. The final truth is also that their sadness is teaching them lessons you tried to teach them through words, but that they could only learn through experience. You told them their behavior hurt you. They didn't really hear it. Now they're hurt by losing you, and suddenly they understand what hurt feels like in relationship context. What it's like to want someone who's unavailable. What it's like to have patterns cost you something irreplaceable. The sadness is education they needed but couldn't receive while you were trying to give it through communication. They're learning through feeling what they couldn't learn through understanding. And the education is valuable for them even though it's painful. If they can use this experience to actually change, to actually pursue therapy and develop capacity they didn't have with you, their sadness will have served purpose. But even if they don't change, even if they just get more defended, the teaching happened. You taught them through leaving. Their sadness is the evidence that the teaching landed. The avoidant is sad that they lost access to you because access to you was something they valued immensely while treating it as disposable, depended on heavily while pretending not to need, benefited from extensively while contributing minimally. The sadness about being cut off hurts because it's teaching them what they had and what they lost through taking it for granted, through being unable to meet you, through choosing their defended state over your partnership. They're sad and they should be sad. The sadness is appropriate response to losing something valuable through your own limitations. Your cutting them off was boundary that protected you and consequence that taught them. Their sadness about being cut off is the hurt that comes from facing consequences you've been avoiding your entire life, finally catching up with you in form of losing someone who mattered, who you couldn't keep because you couldn't do what keeping them required. The sadness is theirs to sit with, to learn from, to use as catalyst for change or to harden around further. But the sadness is not your responsibility to relieve. You cut them off for good reasons. The cut remains. And their sadness about the cut is evidence that the cut was necessary. They're learning through loss what they refused to learn while they had you, and sometimes loss is the only teacher that works. The specific moments when the sadness hits them hardest. The avoidant sadness about losing access to you isn't constant low-level ache. It comes in waves that hit them at specific moments throughout their day. Moments that used to involve you and now involve your glaring absence. They wake up in the morning and for a split second they forget you're gone, reach for their phone to text you good morning, like they sometimes did when they were feeling close, and then reality hits that you're not there to receive it. The morning reminder that you're gone sets the tone for the day, creates sadness that colors everything else because they're starting each day with loss instead of with connection. They're experiencing what they put you through for months, waking up to distance instead of to presence. Except they're experiencing it permanently rather than as temporary phase. They could end by deciding to be more available. The permanence makes the morning realization of your absence harder each day rather than easier, because each morning proves again that this isn't temporary withdrawal you're doing. This is permanent severance you've executed. The sadness hits during mundane moments that used to be shared. They see something funny and their impulse is to send it to you, but they can't because you've blocked them. They have good news and want to tell you first, but you're not available to hear it. They make dinner and remember how you used to eat together, how you had specific things you talk about while eating, how even that mundane daily ritual was part of the fabric of having you in their life. Every small moment that used to include you now includes your absence instead. And the accumulation of small absences throughout the day creates constant background sadness. That's harder to manage than big dramatic grief would be, because there's no single thing to process. It's 1,000 small cuts throughout the day, 1,000 moments where they turn toward where you used to be and find empty space instead. The sadness is particularly intense when they're struggling and have no one to turn to who understands them the way you understood them. They have a bad day at work and you're the person they'd normally talk to about it, the person who'd understand both the external situation and their internal response to it. But you're not available. They can't call you, they can't text you. They can't show up at your place and decompress the way they used to when things were hard. They're sitting with their struggle alone. And the aloneness is teaching them that you weren't just relationship partner, you were their person, the one they turned to, the one who made hard things more bearable. They took that for granted so completely that they didn't recognize they were depending on you to help them manage life until you weren't there anymore, and life got noticeably harder, without you to help them carry it. The sadness also hits hardest when they see you from a distance, or see evidence of your life through social media or through mutual friends. They see you're happy, see you're doing well, see you're clearly fine without them. And instead of being happy that you're happy, they're sad that your happiness doesn't require them, that you're thriving in their absence when they're struggling in yours. The asymmetry of the impact is devastating. You losing them seems to have made your life better, while them losing you has made their life worse. The contrast is teaching them that the relationship was costing you and benefiting them, that you were putting in more than you were getting, that leaving them was upgrade for you while losing you was downgrade for them, and recognizing they were taking more than they were giving, recognizing you're better off without them, recognizing that they were net negative in your life. All of this recognition creates sadness mixed with shame. That's particularly painful because it confirms their core belief about being fundamentally deficient, while also proving that belief cost them someone who saw past their deficiency and accepted them anyway. How the sadness is changing their view of themselves and relationships. The sadness about losing you is forcing the avoidant to reevaluate every story they've told themselves about relationships and about their capacity for them. They told themselves they didn't need relationships, that they were fine alone, that romantic partnership was optional rather than essential to their well-being. But the sadness about losing you is proving those stories were lies they told themselves to manage their fear of need and dependency. They do need relationships. Specifically, they needed your relationship. They're not fine alone, they're lonely and sad, and recognizing that their defended independence was defense rather than genuine preference. Partnership isn't optional for them. They want it, they miss it, they're suffering without it. The sadness is cracking through their defensive narratives and showing them truth about themselves. They're human with human needs for connection, and denying those needs doesn't eliminate them, it just makes them suffer, while pretending they're not suffering. The sadness is also changing how they view their patterns. They used to frame their emotional unavailability as boundaries, their withdrawal as need for space, their inconsistency as authentic expression of their fluctuating feelings. But losing you is reframing all of it as the dysfunction it actually was. They're recognizing that what they called boundaries were walls that prevented intimacy. What they called space was distance that prevented partnership. What they called authentic expression was pattern that destroyed relationship after relationship. The sadness is providing clarity their defenses were preventing. They're seeing their patterns for what they are rather than for what they told themselves they were. And seeing clearly is painful because it means admitting they've been lying to themselves, admitting their patterns are problems rather than preferences, admitting they need to change rather than just needing to find someone who accepts them as they are. The sadness about losing you is changing their view of what they're capable of feeling. They told themselves they weren't someone who felt deeply, who attached strongly, who needed people intensely. But the intensity of their sadness about losing you is proving they do feel deeply. They just feel while defended in ways that prevent them from showing what they feel or acting on what they feel. They're discovering that beneath their defended exterior is someone who feels everything, who attaches profoundly, who needs intensely. The capacity for feeling was always there. They were just suppressing it, managing it, defending against it. And now that you're gone, now that the loss is forcing feelings they can't suppress, they're discovering the depth of their emotional capacity. The discovery is painful because it means recognizing they could have shown you these feelings while they had you, could have let you see how much you meant to them, could have given you the emotional presence you needed if only they'd been brave enough to feel their feelings rather than defend against them. The sadness is also changing their view of what they deserve. They used to operate from a place of entitlement. They deserved patience because they had trauma. They deserved understanding because they were complex. They deserved access to people's care without having to reciprocate because that's just who they were, and people should accept them. But losing you is teaching them different truth. They don't deserve anything they're not willing to work for. They don't deserve patience. They don't reciprocate. They don't deserve understanding they're not willing to extend to others' needs. The sadness is teaching them about reciprocity, about earning rather than expecting, about having to be worthy of what you want rather than just demanding it be given. And the teaching is humbling in ways that might lead to growth or might just lead to more defensiveness. But the humbling is happening either way, through the experience of losing someone who gave them far more than they deserved, and who finally stopped giving when it became clear they'd never give back. The ways the sadness is compounding over time rather than healing. Normal sadness about loss gets better with time. The acute pain dulls. You adjust to the absence. You integrate the loss into your story and move forward. But the avoidant sadness about losing you is getting worse over time rather than better. And the worsening is evidence of how defended they were while they had you. They couldn't feel the full weight of their feelings for you while you were present, because feeling fully would have made them too vulnerable. But now that you're gone, now that there's no risk of vulnerability because you're not available to hurt them, they're finally feeling everything they defended against. The feelings they suppressed while you were there, are all hitting them now, all at once, with accumulated force. They're grieving losing you, but they're also grieving the relationship they could have had if they'd been capable of feeling and showing these feelings while you were still there. The double grief about what was and grief about what could have been if they'd been different, is creating sadness that intensifies rather than fades, because they keep discovering new dimensions of what they lost. The sadness is compounding because they're comparing everyone to you, and everyone is failing the comparison. They thought they could easily replace you, thought anyone could provide what you provided, thought you were interchangeable with any other empath who would be patient with their patterns. But they're discovering through trying to move forward that you weren't generic, you were specific, you were rare, you were a combination of qualities that they can't find in anyone else. New people either lack your empathy, or lack your boundaries, or lack your specific way of understanding them, or lack your particular patience, or lack your capacity to see past their defenses. With each person who fails to be you, the sadness about losing you intensifies, because each failed comparison proves that what they had with you was irreplaceable, that they destroyed something they won't find again, that the loss is permanent in ways they didn't understand initially. The compounding sadness is the avoidant learning through repeated experience that you were one of a kind, and one of a kind lost is lost forever. The sadness is also compounding because they're recognizing the timeline of loss. They lost you months or years ago when you cut them off, but they're only now understanding the full scope of what they lost, only now feeling the full weight of the loss, only now recognizing that they can't get you back. The delayed understanding means the sadness that should have peaked when you first left is actually peaking now, months later, when most people would be healing. The delay is evidence of their defended state. They were too defended to feel the loss fully when it happened, so they're feeling it now, and feeling it now means they're still in acute grief phase while you're already moved on, already healed, already building new life. The asymmetry of the grief timeline, them just entering the worst of it while you're already through it, is making the sadness worse because it's proving they were so defended they couldn't even grieve properly, couldn't even feel the loss when it happened, are only now experiencing what you experienced months ago while you were deciding to leave. The sadness compounds with every failed attempt to restore access. Each time they try to reach you and get no response, each time they hope you'll respond and you don't. Each time they think they see sign you might be softening and then realize it's just their wishful thinking. All of these failed attempts add to the sadness because each one proves again that you're serious, that you're not coming back, that the loss is real and permanent. The failures accumulate into evidence that no amount of wanting you back will bring you back, that they're powerless to undo what they did, that the consequence of losing you is consequence they have to live with permanently. And living with permanent consequence you can't escape from or fix creates sadness that grows rather than shrinks, because each day of the consequence being permanent is another day of facing that this is just how it is now. They lost you. They can't get you back. This is their reality forever. What happens to the sadness if they never do the work to change? If the avoidant doesn't use the sadness as motivation to pursue therapy and actually change their patterns, the sadness will eventually transform into something more toxic: bitterness, cynicism, deeper defensiveness. The sadness will harden into narrative about how people can't be trusted, how vulnerability always leads to pain, how they were right to be defended and they just need to be more defended next time. The transformation of sadness into bitterness is tragedy because it means they learned the wrong lesson from losing you. They should learn that their patterns cost them something precious, and they need to change those patterns. But if they don't do the work, they'll instead learn that caring about people costs you, and the solution is to care less, to be more defended, to never let anyone matter as much as you mattered. The bitterness will poison all their future relationships, because they'll approach everyone with cynicism born from the pain of losing you, will create distance preemptively to avoid ever being hurt like this again, will ensure they never attach deeply enough to experience this kind of sadness again, by never attaching deeply at all. If they don't do the work, the sadness will also become permanent, low-grade depression that colors their entire life. They'll carry you as the one who got away, as the best relationship they had, as evidence of what they're capable of destroying through their patterns. Every future relationship will be measured against you and found wanting, not because future partners are actually insufficient, but because the avoidant is still attached to you, still grieving you, still comparing everyone to you because they never processed the loss and moved through it to the other side. The permanent, low-grade sadness about losing you will make joy harder to access, will make new connection harder to form, will make their life smaller and more constrained, because they're carrying unresolved grief about you everywhere they go. The sadness that could have been catalyst for transformation instead becomes weight they carry that limits everything they do going forward. Without doing the work, the sadness might also drive them to try to recreate what they had with you by finding someone similar, another empath, another patient person, another someone who will understand them. But this will fail because they're trying to replace you rather than trying to become someone capable of keeping someone like you. They'll find someone with your qualities, and they'll repeat the same patterns, will treat this new person the way they treated you, will eventually lose this new person the same way they lost you. And each repetition will add to the sadness, will compound the loss, will create accumulation of people they've destroyed relationships with through patterns they won't address. The sadness about losing you will become sadness about losing everyone who tries to love them. And the accumulation will create depression that's no longer about you specifically, but about their life pattern of destroying everything good they encounter. If they don't do the work, the ultimate transformation of the sadness is into acceptance of loneliness as their permanent state. They'll tell themselves they're just not built for relationships, that partnership isn't for everyone, that they're fine alone, and the sadness they feel sometimes is just minor price for maintaining their independence. The acceptance of loneliness will be defended as choice. They're choosing to be alone because relationships are too complicated, too painful, too risky. But it's not really choice. It's resignation. It's giving up on hope that they could have connection without the pain of loss. Deciding that the pain of loss is too high a price, so they'll just not attach to anyone ever again. The sadness about losing you will be the last time they let themselves feel this deeply. And after the sadness hardens into resignation, they'll spend the rest of their life defended enough that they never risk feeling this way again, which means they'll also never feel love again, never feel genuine connection again, never let anyone matter enough to hurt them. And living that defended, that closed, that protected from both pain and joy is not living, it's existing, it's surviving, it's enduring. But it's not the full life they could have if they did the work to become someone capable of receiving love without defending against it. The avoidant is sad that they lost access to you because losing you is teaching them what they had, what they lost, what their patterns cost them. The sadness hurts because it's the feeling of natural consequences finally catching up with behavior that had been avoiding consequences for years, through finding people who would absorb the impact instead of reflecting it back. The hurt of being cut off is the hurt of facing that you can't take people for granted forever, that patience runs out, that eventually someone leaves permanently when you prove you can't meet them. Their sadness is real and deep, and evidence that you mattered profoundly. But their sadness doesn't obligate you to give them access again, doesn't require you to help them feel better, doesn't mean you should reconsider boundaries that are protecting you and teaching them simultaneously. They're sad. They should be sad. The sadness is appropriate response to losing someone valuable through your own limitations. Let them sit with the sadness, let them learn from it or not learn from it. Let them use it as motivation to change or as confirmation to stay defended. Their sadness is theirs to process. Your boundaries are yours to maintain. And the cut remains regardless of how much the cut hurts them, because the cut is what you needed to move forward, and what you needed matters more than what they want, especially when what they want is access to someone they proved they couldn't value properly while they had them.